I would simply say this. I think most of us, and I include myself in this category, what adults do, men and women in private, is their business. I'm not interested in what they do. Whatever they do, they can do. But when you include children, it's over. That is unacceptable. And that's the real question here, because we know that Epstein was a pedophile. We know that he was feeding the appetite of pedophiles. This is procurer, a pimp. And this man was actively engaged in blackmailing, not in the usual sense for money, but working for the Mossad. And I don't doubt the CIA had a hand in it as well, maybe MI6. So unfortunately, the possibility that he was or is being blackmailed is real. The question is, for what? If it's women, come on. Every NFL star, every National Basketball Association player, all these people, they have endless access to women. And if they're in the other direction, men, I suppose. We don't care. That doesn't matter. I mean, it may be unsavory. It may lower people's opinion of someone on the basis of that kind of behavior. But what really counts here more than anything else is children. We have too many children disappearing in this country every year. We still have children being trafficked over the border with Mexico and, frankly, into our harbors and across into Canada. It's horrendous. It's offensive. It's wrong. It's evil. That's what bothers everybody. And that's what President Trump needs to be sure he is not part of. That's the last thing I want to hear about the President of the United States. So I hope that's not the issue. But I think they're going to have to come clean with this. I think these Epstein files are going to come out. And if it does turn out that he's being blackmailed, first of all, if that's the case, then he has a choice. He can either endure the shame and the misery of being outed publicly, or he can resign. But if you're the President of the United States, you cannot make policy decisions on the basis of what a foreign intelligence entity is holding against you. I think this could bring him down just as surely as the Watergate scandal brought down Richard Nixon. This is much worse because you're dealing with the potential involvement of children. I mean, let's be frank, someone like Epstein is always present in places like Washington, D.C., or West Palm Beach, or New York City, or L.A. The man's just a procurer who have good intelligence connections. To be less polite about the whole thing, he's a very sophisticated, high-end pimp. And if you traffic with people like that, you're always at risk of, as they say, if you lie down with pigs, you come up smelling like garbage. So if you interact with somebody like this over a long period of time, whatever they're doing is going to rub off on you. The problem now is that we don't know what's in these Epstein files. I can only imagine. And we've had all sorts of leaks telling us about hours, maybe even thousands of hours of taped encounters. And we keep hearing about the pedophilia that may be involved with this. This is catastrophic for President Trump. Remember, everybody voted for President Trump. I don't want to say everybody, but most people voted for him because they thought he would be different from his predecessor. He would be fundamentally different. And they held him in much higher esteem because they thought he was a straight shooter and would tell things as they are. They're beginning to find out that's not true. And that's very dangerous. And that's why I have tried to get people to understand just how volatile it is. When a population, a broad population, finally concludes that the class that rules them, whether they're aristocratic or otherwise, is unworthy of ruling them, unworthy of governing them. And we know that we're governed right now by effectively a financial elite that has trillions of dollars at their disposal. They're the ones who are calling the shots in Washington, and they're the ones that are setting the agenda for President Trump because he owes them his election. So when you see that kind of thing and people decide we don't think they're worth maintaining, retaining, eventually you get a rebellion. But my point is that the American electorate is looking at these people and saying these people are disgusting. And they're disappointed in President Trump because they thought he was different. They're beginning to see, maybe not. Looks like he's everybody else. And this has happened before when President Trump was in his first term. Have the critical findings at the Central Intelligence Agency changed since he became president. These findings essentially say who is a threat, who is not a threat, why is it a threat. It's very carefully detailed in its analysis and foundation. The answer is nothing has changed since President Trump became president a second time. All those findings are intact. So no, that's utterly ridiculous. And I think privately, President Trump probably feels that way, but he lacks the strength. He lacks the self-confidence, the conviction to step away from that and say, that's ridiculous. No. And we have no interest under any circumstances in going to war with Russia or, for that matter, China. There's no interest on our part strategically in doing so. In fact, we have a strong interest in coming to some sort of agreement with Russia that averts any conflict at all. But he's not there. That's not what he's going to do. So he is once again conformed to what the status quo dictates, which is a status quo he did not create, but nevertheless he's subordinate to. The administration is flailing, and I think they are ultimately failing right now. And that becomes more and more evident with each passing day. And you can go across the range of issues. There is no strategy for rounding up, evaluating, and expelling illegal aliens. There's nothing going on there. The stuff that happens is all impulse-driven. I see no evidence for a serious effort to deal with the problem on a national level. That's one example. You can go through a number of them, but I think when it comes to our overseas presence, everything is impulse-driven with President Trump. There is no strategy. I have never detected any strategy. When he took over as president, I think he's behaved as he has in the past. Now I'm in charge. Everybody has to do what I say. These are my ideas. We're going to go forward and implement them. And when he runs into opposition, he usually backs down. Then he tries something else. In other words, there is no coherent strategic framework that guides the application of military power or a national industrial policy. You see the same thing with the tariffs. Everyone who opposes me and what I want to do to Russia will have to face 100% tariffs. Then they suddenly back down and say, no, only 25% tariffs. The next question is, why tariffs at all? We're going to punish you, India, with whom we've had friendly relations for a long time, that is known to have good relations with Russia. In fact, India is a state you would turn to for help and assistance in communicating your desires, your goals, and interests to Russia. It's not a state that I would offend or alienate, but that's what we've done. And so Mr. Modi has said, thank you very much. We're not interested. Go fly a kite. The Japanese have said, we're going to buy all the oil and gas we want from Russia. It's all part of the same thing. There is no coherent strategy with attainable political military objectives. None. President Trump is someone who believes threats and bullying work. I think this is the product of his New York City life experience and the real estate market. And frankly, if you look at the White House right now and the people running things and surrounding Trump, it looks like the New York City delegation is running our country. So it may be that everyone is of one mind, that threatening and bullying is an inherently good idea and that it works. We have to go back over President Netanyahu's 5 standing ovations in front of Congress. I mean, who is in charge here? Let's wake up and smell the proverbial coffee. Prime Minister Netanyahu is, in fact, when it comes to these matters, President of the United States. He's in charge. Now, the question is, what do you do if you're in uniform and you're being ordered to do something that you regard as atrocious, as contravening basic law of war and humanity? That's another matter. Now, I'm sure that somebody somewhere in Army or Marine uniform, whether they're special operations or not, would have some questions on that subject. But as far as the people at the top, they're all owned. They owe everything to the lobby. They are going to do what they're told. I pointed to the warnings given by the Egyptian military intelligence to the Israelis. I also pointed to the group of intelligence officers inside the IDF, women, who were employed exclusively for the purpose of watching everything that happens in Gaza, and they reported an imminent attack. I also agreed completely with Max Blumenthal, who talked about the fratricidal killings. The IDF comes in guns blazing, ends up killing a lot of people. The question is, where were they before? Why was there no reaction force? Remember, I too have visited that area. I visited that headquarters, and I know some of the top people in the Israeli Defense Force. Those were very professional, competent people, competent officers, extremely sharp. They had a complete grasp of everything. And I said at the time, this smells bad. This is not real. This was allowed to happen so that it would be a trigger for the larger war. Now you're hearing two card-carrying Zionists who have always stood by the Israelis who are now suddenly saying a year plus later, this doesn't look good. Again, the problem with the American people, it's not really a problem, it's simply a statement of fact, is that most of us live remote from the rest of the world. And these things are in the views of most Americans. What happens in Gaza is not our problem. It's Israel's problem. What Americans don't understand is the extent to which we are ultimately controlled and commanded by Israel. That's what Americans are only now beginning to figure out. As they figure that out, then I think the horror in Gaza will begin to hit home, and they'll understand that we're facilitating it, we're enabling it. And President Trump, I think, also recently mentioned, yes, what's happening in Gaza is terrible and it is starvation, but there doesn't seem to be any willingness on his part to do anything about it. And he acts as though it's beyond his ability to influence. It may be, given the donors that control him, that's possible. And remember, the donors come from many categories: financial elites, ideologues, neocons. There are all sorts of different people that have mega donors. The problem, though, is he does have enormous power if he chooses to exercise it. It may not make his donors happy, but if he decided to get on a plane, Judge, and fly instantly to Israel and land and demand to be taken to Gaza, he may be obstructed initially by the Israelis, but I think ultimately we have enough military power in the region that he could be accompanied by U.S. security details, and he could go see for himself the mindless murder, the deprivation. And this argument is, this is all Hamas's fault. That's why. And if they just dispose of Hamas, then everything will be fine. It's not going to work that way. We know that's not the case. The purpose is very straightforward. They want to exterminate these people or drive them out, one of the two. And they don't care which. And they're completely unconcerned about how many people die. They actually think that's a good thing. And this is the Israeli perspective. President Trump is supporting it. On top of that, you have inflation. And even though the government continues to insist that inflation is under control, it's not. So President Trump has walked himself into a corner. And essentially, the Chinese have said, if you want to play tariff roulette, be our guest, and handed us a pistol and said, go ahead and point it at your head, because that's effectively what he's done. Things are not going to get better. They're going to get worse from here. If you're right now 30, 35 years of age, the average American is probably looking for a job, may have gone to college, if so, is struggling with debt, trying to find a job that is commensurate with his educational skills and abilities. These things are not plentiful. And there are a lot of increasingly radicalized young men in the United States as a result. They know they'll never see Social Security. They know this is all fantasy world. The world has changed. They understand what the sovereign national debt means in terms of their long-term financial future. The baby boomers, on the other hand, they keep pushing the I believe button. These are the people who say, oh, the government will sort this out. We've done this before. Oh, they can print more money. You go down to the younger people and they say that's nonsense. And the boomers are predisposed, as I always was, to be very supportive of Israel. And they just cringe and turn away from the horror over there. But everybody else looks at this and says, what's wrong with you? This is just murder. This is inexcusable. We should have nothing to do with it. So I'm not surprised by those numbers. But remember, until you get these boomers to wake up, until they figure out that their pension funds are all going to go bust when we go into this financial crisis that's looming over us, when they figure out that we can't sell our bonds to anybody, and this new scheme from Besant is not going to work in terms of a stable coin or anything else to try and attract foreign investment in the country, when they understand that, then things will really change. But this boomer